God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. The Holy Gospel. In the name of one God, creator, redeemer, and sustainer of our lives, amen. What I love about this Easter text is that first Sunday, that first Easter, the disciples are huddled together in fear behind locked doors. Earlier that morning, Mary Magdalene had gone to the tomb, and when she got there, she saw that the stone had been rolled away, and that made her afraid. She ran to go tell John and Peter, and the two of them raced to get to the tomb. And when they got there, they went inside, and all they saw were grave clothes lying there. And they didn't know what to do with that. So they went home, and Jesus and Mary stood there, weeping and crying. And there was a man that was there, and he said to her, "Mary, why are you weeping?" And she mistook him for the gardener. And she said, "What have you done with the body? Show me where you have laid him." And the man said to her, "Mary." And in that moment, her eyes were opened, and she saw Jesus. And she said, "Rabboni." And she reached out to touch him, like she wanted to grab on and hold. And he said to her, "Don't touch me. My time has not come. I must go to my Father. Go and tell the disciples." So Mary went and she told the disciples that morning, and apparently they didn't know what to do with that information, that she had seen the risen Lord. Because there they were, cowered in fear. That message, that news did not penetrate very deep. Apparently they had no way of processing it or understanding it, because what they had experienced had been too discombobulating. And their world had been fractured and turned upside down on Good Friday. They had seen Jesus die. They had seen his blood poured out of his body. And now what Mary was saying didn't make sense. And so there they are, huddled in fear. A lot like we are. That's what I like about this text this Easter. And we're all sheltered in our homes, living in the shadow of death. Our lives have been disrupted and discombobulated and shattered. I've talked to many people this week, and I hear grandparents aching for the hugs of their children, and I hear grandchildren hugging for the hugs of their grandparents. I hear young people aching to be with their friends and who feel the loss of opportunities, like going away to a Girl Scout guide camp for the first time, or prom and graduation. I hear people talking about being fired from their jobs and losing their businesses and losing their retirement funds. And we're safe, we're sound, we're sitting at home. And yet our world has changed. And, for a long time I was saying, well, it's just, after a month we'll go back to normal. We'll go back to the way it was. And as we've been listening to Adrian Dix and various people talk this week, and everybody's telling us, no, the world will not go back to the way it was. Things have changed. And we don't know what the new normal is going to be like, what it will look like. And I don't know what to do with that. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it the way that these disciples were trying to wrap their mind around what was going on around that first Easter. And I'm not sure what to make of Easter. I'm enjoying the sun. I'm enjoying the spring flowers. I'm feeling the presence of spring in the midst of also feeling confused and grief. And so that's what the disciples are there. They're huddled together behind these locked doors on that first Sunday, that first Easter, in fear. And Jesus appears in the midst of them. And he says, "Peace be with you." And I imagine this inbreaking of peace that drives away the fear they're feeling. And there's a moment of rejoicing, and Jesus says again, "Peace be with you." As the Father has sent me, so I send you. And then he breathes on them. He breathes on them with this breath, with this wind, with the Spirit of God. He breathes into them this pneuma spirit, this Holy Spirit. And they receive the presence of God. And Jesus says, go and forgive sins. Which is another way of saying, go and free people. Free people from the things that they are bound by. Free them from the guilt and the shame that keep them from love. Free them from those things that keep them from being in right relationship with people. Free them from kind of the insecurities and the inadequacies that keep them from being fully the people that God has created them to be. Set them free. Forgive their sins. Proclaim to them that good news. All the disciples heard this except for Thomas. And the text doesn't tell us where Thomas was. I imagine that he was off by himself in the wilderness. I mean, there are some people when they're aching and they're hurting, they want to be with people, they want to surround themselves with people, and some people don't. Some people need to be by themselves, and I imagine Thomas was one of those people, and he was off by himself in the wilderness, just howling and aching and confused and grieving. He had loved Jesus. He was willing to follow Jesus into death. And now all of a sudden, it's taken from him. He's been robbed. He feels betrayed. He doesn't know what to do. He's feeling feelings that are bigger than he can contain, and he falls apart by himself somewhere in the wild. And when he comes back together, enough to join the disciples again, the first thing they say to him is, "Oh, he is risen." And Thomas is like, "Don't mess with me like that. Don't play with my heart. I got burned once. I don't want to get burned again. Unless I see the marks in his hands and put my finger in those marks, and unless I put my hand in his side, I will not believe." And so a week later, there they are again, behind closed doors, huddled together in their houses. I mean, they've got some faith, but faith takes time. And while they're sitting there still in fear, Jesus appears amongst them and he says, "Peace be with you." And he looks right at Thomas. He says, "Put your finger here on the wounds in my hands. And put your hand in my side." And the text doesn't tell us whether Thomas actually did that or not. But I think he did. I think he reached out and he touched. And he could see where the skin had been torn, where the blood had flowed, where the pain had been. And he's put his finger in the wound, and then he put his hand in the side. Something shifted for him. I think he saw that there was something bigger than his fear. There was something deeper than his pain. And he kneels down and he says, "My Lord and my God." And then Jesus says, "Blessed are those who believe, who have not seen." And that's where we're at. You know, I've been thinking about this. Like, I too would have wanted to touch. I too would have wanted to reach out and put my hands in the wounds in the side just so that I could believe. And I'm struck by, in this moment of COVID where there's some physical distancing, Jesus would have been 2 meters away and I could not have reached out and touched. That's like what Mary experienced in the beginning. She wants to touch Jesus, and Jesus says, "Don't touch me. You can't hold on to me." There's this interplay in the text around being able to touch. I would want to touch Jesus too, and I can't. Peter, our reading from Peter, writes to one of those early Christian communities. And he talks about faith, and he talks about the nature of faith and being those who can believe without having seen. And he says, though you suffer various trials. There's something about this suffering and trial that tests faith, that refines faith, that actually makes it stronger. And then Peter puts it in the context of that there's been this new birth into a living hope because of the resurrection. And I wonder if that is that sense of living hope. What does it mean to have living hope? That Easter hope only makes sense in the face of death. That Easter hope only makes sense in the face of suffering. You can't have Easter without having had Good Friday. And here we are in the midst of anxiety. Here we are in the midst of uncertainty. Here we are in the midst of grief. And is it possible that this is the birth pangs of a new and living hope? It talks about new birth, right? I mean, labor is a convulsive, upturning, painful, agonizing moment that gives birth, gives way to new life. And I wonder if that's what's happening here. Last week, if you listened to the Archbishop's sermon, she recounted this story where somebody said to her, "Do you believe in the resurrection?" And she said, "That's kind of the wrong question. It's not whether or not I believe in the resurrection. It's whether or not I rely on the resurrection. Do I live as if the resurrection is true? Do I live banking my life, my hope on the possibility?" And I resonated with that. Can we live as if life and love are stronger than death? As if life and love are stronger than their fear? He is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.